Today it's not a day of rare, exquisite, or prohibitively expensive coins. Today is the day to look at one of the most common Roman coins out there. A piece so easily accessible, it was struck in such vast numbers that pretty much every collector can have one in pretty good condition without spending too much. I'm talking about the Gloria Exercitus type, which many of you have in your collections, and if you don't, I recommend you get one. As I'll explain in this video, even a very humble coin like this one holds a lot of information about ancient Rome. Let's get some historical context first. The year is 330 AD. We are on the reign of Constantine the Great, and after a very turbulent early reign, he had asserted himself as the sole ruler of the empire. Constantine strikes coins celebrating all members of the imperial family, in particular coins celebrating himself and his three sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans. Not very creative with names. Numismatically, Constantine is better known for the introduction of the gold solidus, which would be the main European gold coin for centuries. But by many orders of magnitude, what the average Romans saw the most on their everyday transactions were these little coins here, the numus, or follis, some people like to call it nowadays. These were introduced some 30 years prior to the estimated date of this coin here, and they were big, impressive silver bronze coins. But by that time, inflation, good old inflation, had picked up and they were smaller in size. They still had some silver in them, although this piece doesn't make it look like it, but their smaller size allowed for the mint to just make more of them. Comparing these coins and its portraits to the gorgeous engraving from the 1st and 2nd centuries might give you an impression that Roman artists from the 4th century were worse, or that the engravers were losing their skill. This is only partly true. The empire was stable during Constantine, but its glorious days were long gone. The crisis of the 3rd century really did a lot of damage to the empire, and it did not recover fully. The inflationary nature of Roman money at that time also contributed to this. The number of follis, the sheer number struck compared to the denarius, for example, was much, much higher. This meant that engravers simply did not have the time to engrave more dies with the same quality, so the busts had to be somewhat simplified. You can still find lots of fine details, as you can see here, but to make the image on the coin be exactly the same as the face of the emperor took too long, leading to a more abstract portrait to be chosen. But there's also a political element to this. Constantine lived in a period called the Dominate. This word comes from dominus, meaning lord. Earlier in the empire's history, the emperor was seen more like just another man. A very important man, a man with a certain connection with the divine, but a man of flesh and blood. This changes during the late empire. The empire becomes much more like an absolutist monarchy, and the emperor was something unreachable, an abstract idea, an unquestionable god on earth. The rests, for example, I'm putting on the screen, the rest of this gigantic statue of Constantine, now in the Capitoline Museum, shows how the emperor was shown more like an entity instead of a man. This lack of realism was not a sign of faltering artistic quality, it was made on purpose. So how about we actually go to the coin? Let's head to the obverse of this piece. Here we have Constantine the Great looking to the right. The legends state he is the undisputed emperor, Constantinus Maximus Augustus. The emperor is wearing some drapery over his cuirass, and look how curious, he is wearing a jeweled diadem. This was one of the first times an emperor was depicted wearing such a thing. And why would that be? If you know a little bit about Roman coins, you would have guessed that on other pieces, you might be used to seeing the emperor wearing a laurel wreath, meant to symbolize his special status amongst the citizenry, or the radiate crown, a symbol typically chosen for the double denarius or Antoninianus to distinguish it from the laureate single denarius denomination. This diadem, however, is the symbol of royalty. Since ancient Greek times, kings were depicted wearing diadems. In fact, these diadems will evolve into the medieval crowns worn by kings. That reinforces the point I have just made, that this was a different political order, one much more akin to a monarchy. And finally we head to the reverse, which makes this coin so iconic with collectors. Gloria Exercitus, the glory of the army. Constantine was a good general, and he dared to do something unthinkable for the time, to abolish the Praetorian Guard, the same Praetorian Guard that put so many emperors on the throne and killed so many others. We need to recognize that the ancient world was an extremely brutal place. Wars of conquest and campaigns to plunder your neighbors were kinda like seen as part of the dynamic between nations. And this is what we have here, a nudge to the military. Every emperor with a modicum of sense knew that the soldiers were the ones who put him on the throne, and they were very capable of taking you down if they wanted. Apart from the legends, we have two soldiers holding their spears and each one carrying a standard, but that's not it. Let's maybe dig a little bit deeper. Pay attention to the soldiers. Don't they look a bit different to the typical Roman legionary in plate armor we know from history books and movies? No signs of swords, we have a spear instead. The shields also look different from the square scutum from the early days. Something is going on here. And that is because the legionary from the late Empire used a different kit. These two gentlemen here are likely two comitatenses, the infantrymen of the late Empire. Their main kit consisted of a mail shirt, simpler and easier to maintain, an oval shield, spear, helmet, and often a cloak worn over the armor. They were a bit lighter armor than their legionary forebears, but they did the job of mobilizing to any threats that crossed the frontier, and their kit was much easier and cheaper to maintain. So what about the standards, the long sticks between them? So these are military standards, called signum by the Romans. The standard was a long pole decorated with medallions and plates, used by units on the battlefield to identify themselves. These would also be used on the march and on parades as a way to represent each of the units. Each legion had 60 of these to identify each of the cohorts. Depictions of military standards are very common on Roman coins. I'm putting on screen now a bunch of different examples from different centuries where you can see other standards being shown. And no standard was as important as the aquila, the main standard of the legion, which, as the name implies, had an eagle at its top. Losing this standard to the enemy was a major shame to the entire legion. The aquila is also very often portrayed on coins. I'm putting on screen, again, examples of coins issued by Septimius Severus, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aurelius, for example, all of which had the aquila. And this military tradition of having the standard, carrying the standard, is in fact very much alive. Of course, they aren't used in battle anymore, but next time you see a military parade, pay attention to the soldiers at the very front. It is very likely one of them will be carrying some sort of standard, flag, something to represent the unit. This tradition comes straight from the Romans to our days. So going back to our coin, the only part of the design left for us to look at is the bottom part, where we have the mint mark, the letters SMN, and the Greek letter delta. This stands for Sacra Moneta Nicomedia, or the Holy Mint of Nicomedia, where this coin was minted. The delta, the fourth Greek letter, means it was made at the fourth officina of the mint, the fourth branch of the mint. This explains indirectly why these coins were just so abundant. The late Roman Empire unified all imperial mints on its territory under one single currency system, one single set of denominations, meaning this type of design was struck all throughout the empire on multiple mints at the same time. So you have a massive number of coins and an enormous number of variations being made. As a little less curiosity for the type, it kept being struck after Constantine was dead, and during the reign of his sons. Here's another Gloria Exercitus type struck under his son, Constans. And I keep this one in a 2x2 flip because the thing is so small I fear dropping and losing the damn thing. As you can see, it is substantially smaller than the previous one, which was already a reduced numus. This is a result of the inflationary policies taken by the imperial administration in the late empire. And as you can see here, it's a little bit comical. Now the two soldiers need to share one standard between themselves instead of having one for each. Have you got a Gloria Exercitus coin in your collection? If you don't, you should. These coins are full of history and charm. I hope you enjoyed this little video. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.